Ladies and gentlemen, we're here at the Ritz-Carlton in Atlanta, Georgia, and it is with great pleasure that we welcome singer and songwriter Mr. J.D. Souther. On behalf of our listeners, thank you so much for making the time to talk to me today.
Thank you very much, and I apologize for the fact that I'm still eating. We're sort of squeezed in between the meal and the concert, so.
I think most stories are best from the beginning. So I'd like to ask you, what were your early musical influences?
I was born a small child. My grandmother, my father's mother, was an opera singer, and her parents were Gilbert and Sullivan singers. My dad was a big band singer, so I'm quite sure the first thing I heard was probably Puccini. And then as I was growing up in my house, we heard all the songwriters, Gershwin, Cole Porter, Matt Dennis, Harold Arlen, Rodgers and Hammerstein, Rodgers and Hart. We grew up in a house where music was played all the time. I think the first song I knew all the way through was the Frank Sinatra's version of the soliloquy from Carousel. My boy will, he's a he will. You know, wait a minute. What if he is a she? What a girl you've got. And then it changes tones. It's this beautiful ballad then. I think it's probably the first song, except for maybe the Nessun Dorma from Turandot. That's probably the first song I knew all the way through.
Can you remember a time in your life when you knew you were going to be a musician?
I can't remember a time when I wasn't going to be a musician.
Goes back that far.
Yeah, I just don't. I think if there was a plan B, it was to race Formula One cars, and there was no real entry point in the Texas Panhandle to open wheel racing. So,
I was hoping you could tell us a little about your memories from the apartment you shared with Glenn Frey.
It's too damn small.
And Jackson Browne lived beneath you?
Well, he said, chewing away at this delicious fresh fish. Glenn and I had a place upstairs. Jackson had a place down below, which had one window, after which I think his publishing company was named, Open Window Music. Jackson moved out first because he got the first record deal. He got a deal with Asylum. He got a little house by the Hollywood Bowl on Camrose Court. I moved down into his apartment, so Glenn had the upstairs to himself. I had the downstairs. Then I got a deal with Asylum because Jackson took me to David Geffen's house, and he said, I played him 2 songs, and played 2 most obscure songs I could possibly pull out of my repertoire, and he went, yeah, I'm not sure why you played me those, but you're great. You're a good songwriter. Yes, you got a deal. So then I got another little house. It was actually across the drive from where Jackson's house was. It was on a place called Camrose Court. And so Jackson and I heard each other writing all of our early stuff. We probably influenced as much by each other. Certainly I was by him. Also was influenced enormously by a woman I knew named Judy Sill, who died later, but who was I think the second artist signed to Asylum. And she was brilliant. I think she was miles ahead of any of us as a songwriter at the time. And she and I loved each other, and I really cared for each other's music too, and nurtured it. And we were also both Bach freaks. So she would be the woman that would be playing something on the piano, and she'd come bustling out of the bedroom and say, no, leave the third out. Put the third on the bottom. Put the third in the bass. Leave it out of the top. Don't play the triad. Just play the 1 and the 5. You move them around. And she was a very wonderful gal. Really influential for me. And also I heard Tim Hardin about that time. And I think Tim Hardin is probably the logical connective tissue between jazz and acoustic guitar songwriting.
If you had to pick a genre, what would you say your favorite type of music is?
Jazz.
And why would that be?
Because it's so open-ended. It just doesn't. I mean, there may have been periods, sort of fusion, whatever crap periods in the 80s or so, where it seemed to have some. There was the illusion of no restrictions, but it actually had some. I think in general, jazz as far back as you can go. King Oliver, Louis Armstrong, Art Tatum. Doesn't matter how far back you go. Right up to now, to watching, the young bloods in jazz, Jamie Cullum and Chris Body and even Diana Krall and the young players now, Jeff Coughlin and you see that jazz is, as Joseph Campbell would have said, transparent to transcendence. It's completely open at the top. Given the structure, given the schooling, given the education, given the background, given the time put into like learning how to handle this thing you're holding, you can play anything you want. And I don't think there are very many genres or formats, whatever you call them, where that's not only encouraged, but where that really is the holy grail. Although I think I don't have any real genre prejudice about music. Duke Ellington once said there's only two kinds of music, good music and bad music.
Yeah.
And I very much agree. We were talking earlier about singers, and I told you that I had heard Sinatra my whole life, but when I heard Ray Charles, like my world changed, because of my respect, although I respected Sinatra, he was a great jazz singer all his life. I mean, try to sing along with a Sinatra record. You'll miss all the entrances. Even if you think you know those records and you've memorized them, he's just, wherever he is, against the backbeat, it's perfect. And he can find it, and maybe you can, and maybe you can't, But he was the older guy, that was who my parents liked. By the time I moved to California and started making music, he was making Strangers in the Night and very different kinds of records, But when I was young and I heard Ray Charles, and I just thought, wow, man, singing is music as much as anything else. And then I realized that Ray Charles was also probably one of the most influential piano players in American history, and great arranger, great writer, and I think he's actually the titan of the latter half of the 21st century in American music. I think it's the arc of my emotional life is musically prescribed by Ray Charles music. I listened to it ceaselessly when I was a kid. I was listening to it 3 weeks ago when I was home in Nashville for a week. I had Soul Plus. So what's the one with Quincy wrote all the charts? Anyway, I had that one in. I had modern sounds of country and western, and the live album from Atlanta where he's singing "Making Whoopee."
Oh yeah.
Which has got to be the seminal version of that song, And I love it just as much now as I ever did. I think he's the great teacher in music for me.
When you started out as a professional musician, what was it that you envisioned? When I started out as a professional, that would have to be pretty young, because when I was 15, even though I was listening to rock and roll like crazy, and I'd already discovered Orbison and Buddy Holly and all the local guys in Texas, because I was in Amarillo by then. And there were great rockabilly musicians all around. But what I was playing for a living was I was playing just casuals, which means one-nighters for those who don't know, with whatever jazz group they could assemble anywhere, which usually was guys in their 30s and 40s, and I was just getting my learner's permit. So I think at the time I was listening to a lot of Miles and a lot of Horace Silver, and I think I probably thought that when I was a grown-up, whatever that would have meant to a 14 or 15, 16-year-old kid, that I would be living in Paris and playing drums in a jazz club, hopefully with Miles or somebody like that, and smoking a lot of dope and having great-looking French women. And that was pretty much my aspiration at that moment. Pretty standard dreams.
I think so, yeah. Certainly shared by there were only 3 of us kids in Amarillo, Texas who really played jazz, but that's pretty much what we all hoped for.
Right. So your songs have been covered by a lot of people. Is there one in particular that you're especially proud of, the cover that they did? When you heard it, you thought, that was a good rendition of what I wrote.
I hear that a lot, because I've been, I was lucky. I had great singers and great record makers who were friends, Linda Ronstadt made fantastic records of my songs, and I think her instrument, that voice of hers, wow, it still just staggers me. She made a jazz album 2 years ago with George Massenburg that still is killer. I think it's called Humming to Myself. It's got some Rosemary Clooney stuff on it, stuff that she loved Rosemary, so there's some things that she did on it, and great version of Miss Otis Regrets. She pretty much nailed everything she did. Eagles made fantastic records. They still make fantastic records. I mean, their first #1 record was a song that was Best of My Love, and last year when they put out a new album, the first single was Mine Again. You know, I'm the fish, the test fish, I think they throw out, see if the water's all right. So, and they always make great records of my songs. They're great singers and great arrangers and great record makers. The most interesting one, I'd have to say, was Hugh Masekela's record of Best of My Love.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I don't know if it's still in print, but I was in the studio in Hollywood, and Jackson came running in, and he said, do you want to meet Hugh Masekela? And I said, sure, I'd love to. Is he playing someplace? And he goes, well, he's actually playing your song right next door in the next studio.
Oh.
And I went, no way. So I'm running over, and he was a great guy, just a delightful guy. And he didn't know all the verses, so he didn't sing them. He just sang the first verse, played the other verses, and then he and his girls sang the choruses. But there's a lot of good records. I mean, the Dixie Chicks made a great record of I'll Take Care of You. It's on the Wide Open Spaces album. Huge album. And that was a song would never in the world have occurred to me to sing 3-part harmonies. It's a little song I wrote on piano, you know, and I'm generally pretty much delighted with, I've had people make great records of my songs, and I never take it for granted. I'm like, Paul Williams is a friend of mine, and we both are of the same mind in that anytime someone that you haven't pitched it, that someone just picks one of your songs and sings it, it's already a compliment. You know, and however they interpret it is another thing. Sometimes you like it better than other times, but it's still fabulous. You know, I mean, I thought every version of Faithless Love had been sung that could be sung. I think there's 25 records of it or something, including one in an Indian one.
Oh.
And I don't mean American Indian, I mean an Indian one. And there's a 4-part harmony one, I think, by the Modern Folk Quartet, and Lynn Anderson cut it, and Glenn Campbell cut it in the 80s and was nominated for a Grammy for Country Song of the Year. It's been just recorded by everybody, but Bernadette Peters made a beautiful and tender and very sparse record of it that actually I think kills me more than any of them. You just never know. I mean, I didn't know till this year that Tom Jones had recorded a song of mine.
Really?
Yeah. And I found it somewhere out there. You know.
It's always a tough question, I've noticed, for songwriters, but could you pick a favorite of the ones that you've created?
No. I mean, probably at the moment, yeah, I think it's the last thing on the new album, which is the last thing written, called The Secret Handshake of Fate. But generally, no, I can't. I was doing an interview once, and Warren Zevon was at my house. And Warren was the king of brevity. He and my friend Thomas McGuane, the novelist, are just, for economy and wit, you can't beat these two guys. So someone had just asked me a question, what's your favorite song? And I went, my favorite song? And Zevon, who just wanted to go eat dinner, said, tell him it's the shortest one. And so I picked Simple Man, Simple Dream, because Warren had been doing it on stage. And so that's a good song. That's all right. But I always like the new ones best, because I haven't heard them as much.
Yeah. Is there any particular reason that you, I hope this doesn't sound too pointed, but that you took a while to come out with a new album?
Well, you know, if I write a book, I'll tell you what happened in those 20 years. But the reason that I cut this album now is because the material was there, and because I found these players, and, you know, I don't know who said it, Wendell Berry probably, or maybe Stafford, but one of the poets just said, poetry comes up when it can. You know, you can't always direct it. Sometimes things are just better than they are other times, and this batch of songs, actually this album really started in Cuba in 1998. I was in Havana for a week, and profoundly rich musical environment. And also a great week to be there. We were there the week that Rod Cooder and Wim Wenders were down there premiering the movie of Buena Vista Social Club. And also we saw the Social Club play with all of them before any of them started dying off. we saw him play a set at the Charlie Chaplin Theater. And it might be the most interesting and one of the most powerful musical sets I've ever seen. And I mean, I've seen good music. I've seen Miles on a lot of good nights. I've seen Ray Charles a few times. I've seen Pavarotti. I've seen some great stuff, but seeing the Social Club there in Cuba was really remarkable, really remarkable. And also, I was a drummer. I told you before, I grew up, I was a drummer, and my dad was a Tito Puente fan, and I loved Olatunji, and was the guy that had the hit with Herbie's song Watermelon Man, Mongo Santa Maria. I always loved African rhythms and Afro-Cuban rhythms, and being in Havana for a week was just like, wow, it's like being saturated with things that never stop moving. First of all, the women are incomprehensibly beautiful. Cuban women are just, there's something genetic there that's just, they're wild and gorgeous. And it seems like everybody sings, dances, or plays, or all three. Yeah. And those rhythms are just everywhere. And I just came back with a full-on case of infection. There's no way to inoculate against that for me. And I think that was the seed of this album, although there are two songs that are a little older than that. They're from the year before, actually, The Border Guard and In My Arms Tonight, maybe from 97. But everything else is 98, 99, and then again, a couple of years ago when I made the album, I started really assembling songs, because I've always got hundreds just scattered around, words and scratches on score paper and odd tunings and guitars, and I'm surrounded with the detritus of my own sort of trail of thoughts and experiments, and now and then there's just a moment where I feel certain, some kind of magnetism pulls certain things together, and these things were all pulling in the same direction. And also I just got lonesome for jazz, and I started going out to jazz clubs, and I found that Nashville, Tennessee, though people who don't live there might not think it, has a wealth of great jazz players, including a really thriving jazz workshop there, where there's always good music, where they're playing jazz most weekends, and they're teaching jazz. And then I met all these guys. I met Chris Walters and Jeff Coffin and Rod McGaha and Dan Emmel and Jim Mayer, and I know you've had Chris and Jim on your show, and Jim White, this fabulous drummer from Georgia who's up in Colorado teaching jazz now. But these guys all just inspired me, and I got them all out to the Blues Barn, which is what I call my barn, my studio, and it just clicked. It was a good team. They were first of all, as players, they're killing. All of them are just killing. And second of all, it's the first time I'd had that kind of ensemble together around my music, and I always wanted to feel like I was a good band leader. I had good guitar bands in the past, but I had great guitar players that were sort of at the head of them, Waddy Wachtel or Josh Leo, or somebody was generally, or keyboard player Vince Melamed. Somebody was usually sort of designated as the musical director, right? So that I could just go off and be I could just deliver the songs and sort of throw arrangement ideas in, give them the voicings I liked, and disappear into my own world and come back and find things at least together enough for me to tweak them in rehearsals. Although that's not those guys, that wouldn't be their memory of it. I mean, they called one of their tours, they called the band Hitler's Damaged Pets, which I have a feeling was not flattering to me. But for this album, for If the World Was You, I just had I had a great ensemble of players. I had the little quintet, the little horn quintet that I'd always wanted to have, that was reminiscent of that 58, 59 to 61 Miles Davis band, where there was two horns and a broadly influenced piano player and a solid rhythm section. But I didn't think a songwriter had ever made that kind of album. I certainly never heard one. In fact, I'm pretty sure nobody did. And I just thought it was a next logical expansion, for want of a better word.
The first song on the album I really like. It kind of
that's the safest one. It's a good place to start.
It's a good place to start. It's kind of sad, kind of happy at the same time.
It also has that little fanfare in the beginning too, which tells you there's going to be horns on this album. You know, it has that little intro. Da 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 da. Then the song comes. You know. But it's pretty safe territory to start with. It's kind of just straight eighth note music, and you know, verse, chorus, bridge, verse, chorus. It's not too, as my friend Jeffrey Cox would put it, it's not too challenging.
Yeah.
And then, you know, later on things get a little crazier and crazier. But
And then the second song has Bela Fleck on it.
Indeed it does, yeah. It was written for him and Jeff and Rod to play, yeah.
House of Pride.
Yeah.
So you mentioned that the last track, The Secret Handshake of Fate, that's your favorite song on the album. I think it was the third song that has kind of like a Latin feel to it. Is that the one?
There's a lot of Afro-Cuban sounding stuff. And the third one is probably Journey Down the Nile. Yeah, it actually has a Cuban. That rhythm pattern is called songa, I think. It's a left bum ba bum 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 bum. It's just a way of moving the bass line down in this particular rhythmic structure. It's Chris Walter's idea.
Oh yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. And we played it with that and without. We played it very straight, boom, 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 without that thing too. And it just seemed to work better with it. So,
when somebody listens to this record, or when they come out and they hear you perform, what is it that you hope that the listener gets out of the experience?
Geez, I don't know. I hope they get laid when they get home. You know? I mean, I have no idea. I mean, I know what I expect when I go out, or what I want when I go hear music. I just want to be thrilled. I want to be absorbed.
Yeah.
So I hope that's what I believe in, this kind of remorseless absorption in the moment. So I hope that's what's happening when we're playing. Or in this tour, in the case of just me playing, you know, by myself, it's not going to be as textured as it will be later in the summer with the band, but it seemed like a kind of a good audience-friendly way to go back on the road after all these years. And that would, I think, people feel comfortable, and they feel like the people that are not so comfortable with jazz, because everyone isn't. They don't know what it is. They envision something confusing and difficult, and of course it isn't. All you got to do is go along. You know, it's a Ferris wheel. It goes whether you're driving or not. It's going to get there. But for this tour, I just thought, well, if I've just got me and my 3 or 4 Gibsons out there and a grand piano, I can move around, play anything comes to mind. I can play. I don't have to have a set sheet. I don't have to think about where it's going to go, or I can just sort of loon around on stage and play whatever pops into my head. So that way I'll play songs that are, you know, I'll play songs nobody's ever heard of, and I'll play songs that were big hits, and I hope I weave them all together into what's a good set. It's a little more difficult for me to be sure, because I tend to chatter between songs and doodle around with the piano. Last night was Valentine's Day, so I played my Funny Valentine. And,
nice.
And like I told you, I might do a Duke Ellington song tonight. I don't know. I never know what's going to happen. You know, last time I was out, I was doing a George Jones song, so I never know. But I know there's a lot more songs of mine than I have time to play. So I'm not going to get to everything people want to hear. So, but I'll be back again.
There's a song that you co-wrote that I've always liked called "The Good Fight"
with Jimmy.
With Mr. Buffett, and you've written another song with him, I think.
Yeah, Living It Up.
Living It Up, and you narrated his audio book.
I did read a book for him. Yeah, that was Jane's idea, actually. I think.
How did you meet Mr. Buffett?
I can't even remember. We're probably too high to remember, but I guess it was probably in Aspen in the early '70s, mid '70s.
This might seem like this is a question that a lot of people actually have trouble answering, but what is it that you like about music?
Everything.
Everything.
Yeah.
You've had the chance to play in a lot of different places, and you've had a chance to travel to different places around the world. What is your all-time favorite place that you've been to?
To play music or just to be?
Both.
The different answers. I've only played one little set for, I went to Montana to do a Rock the Vote thing for Obama before the last election, but I have to say at the moment, well, my all-time favorite place is anywhere along the California coastline. I just know it really well. I know that coastline from Mexico to Oregon, and then pretty much north of there too. And I love it. I just adore it. There's something so fresh and bold and uninhibited about that weather coming off the Pacific Ocean onto the West Coast. It's the first time that weather's hit land since Hawaii, you know. And I'm crazy about it. But lately I've been going to Montana, and I got 2 or 3 friends that live in a small town in Montana, and I love it there. The sky's still big and clean, and it's got that nice kind of blend of people now. There's been enough generations of hippies marrying rednecks that, you know, that it's got this sort of frontiersman edge, this rough edge on it, but there's a real serious intellectual undercurrent there. There's this town I'm talking about is about 12,000 people, and there's 30 or 40 published writers there. So you're never at a loss for a good conversation. It is what they call it, the last great place. It's pretty amazing. Although there's a lot of places. I love the Scottish Highlands. I love Paris in the springtime. Every place I've been, I always think I could live there. I mean, the first time I went to Japan, I thought, gee, I could live here.
It's fun going places and fantasy.
Yeah, it is. Well, I've moved a lot of those places. You know, I've lived in Texas, Colorado. Not Japan for very long, but certainly longer than the tour lasted. And the Village in New York, and 3 towns in California, and almost moved everything up to Seattle once just because I really liked the weather, which nobody understands, but I did. And I went to play the main line in Pennsylvania once. It's near Bryn Mawr, which you should probably know is a college filled with beautiful women. And I almost bought a big house there just because I like the place and I like the visuals so much. And I always think I could live in Manhattan or outside Manhattan. I don't know if I could deal with Manhattan around the clock, but you know, if you live upstate or in Connecticut or something, all you can do is get on a train, and 50 minutes later you're midtown. So I like every place. I love where I grew up. You know, I go home to Amarillo, even though my parents are dead now, and it doesn't have the same feeling it did before. I always fly in the mid-afternoon so I can drive out to the west side of town and watch the sunset. I love physicality. I love the land in a lot of places, and the sky and the ocean, and it's very hard for me to imagine a life spent entirely indoors or devoid of weather and geographical variety.
I have 2 final questions before we
Final Jeopardy.
What is your all-time favorite meal?
Meal? Oh my God, I'm such an eater. Well, you've just watched this. Yeah, I'm a hog. I'm blessed with my mother's high metabolism, so I can pretty much eat anything. But my favorite meal, it would either be something that my friend Ken Frank, who is a chef at a wonderful restaurant called La Toque, means the cap, the chef's cap. And La Toque is in Northern California. It's in Napa. It would either be anything he's cooked me, or probably one of several great meals at a Japanese restaurant called Asanebo in Los Angeles, in Studio City, owned also by a friend of mine, Tetsuya. And he has as fresh a fish as you can get in Japan. And I'm a sashimi nut, so I can sit all night and just eat toro, just eat that fatty part of the tuna, and be happy as can be.
The final question I have for you. This program goes out to over 40 nations around the world. So what would you like to say to all those people that are listening in?
I'm on my way.
I'm
coming.
All right.
We're going to take this around the world. We're going to Bergen. I can just tell you the things that are already booked on the calendar. There's a Glastonbury Festival in England. We're going to go to Netherlands. We're going to go to Sweden. We're going to go to... I hope we get this little gig in Paris. I really want to play. You might have heard about it. Jimmy played there. Jim Mayer told me about it. There's a club there.
The Morning Star?
Yeah, something like Club. That. Yeah. And we're going to go every place, I hope. You know, I don't like it. I don't have any more kind of regional or national or ethnic exceptionalism in me than I do geographical. I don't believe in any kind of local superiority. I'm just as fascinated by the Senegalese refugee band as I am, by the Dave Brubeck quartet. I just love music. I love hearing people make music, and it always comes out of the ground. It comes out of people's blood where they live, and it's always fascinating. It's always a trip. It's always a journey into a culture that at first you think is not yours, and in the end you realize that I heard Jack Nicholson say once when he was getting the Directors Guild Award, he said, I think the question was asked about how he could play so many characters and have them all be relevant and real, and he said, well, it's simple. I think people are more alike than they are different. And I do too.
It reminds me of something that Barack Obama said. He said, we have that much more in common than that what separates us.
Exactly. Well, they could be the same. You never see Jack and Obama in the same room at the same time. So.
Well, it has been a pleasure dining with you and having this chat.
My pleasure. My pleasure. Thanks for having me on the show. And
thank you for this opportunity.
Thanks.
I've had fun.
Me too.